When it comes to the 21st Bond film, the only way I can really talk about it is to give it to you straight. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Countdown to Bond 25 here on Thumb Together. My name is Andrew Fantasia. If you like this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up and give some love to that subscribe button as well. We have reached the Daniel Craig era, which is our current era. We are here right now. We're on the home stretch. We can see the finish line. But first, we gotta play a hand of cards because we're talking Casino Royale. First released in November 2006, Casino Royale absolutely changed the game forever. And what I mean by forever is complicated, and I'll save that for, the final day of this countdown because I have some thoughts. But in the meantime, just know, Casino Royale really took the whole James Bond franchise and shook it. And now, what's going to come out of that bottle doesn't look the same anymore. The plot revolves around a mysterious individual named Le Chiffre, who is a banker who basically uses terrorism as his own form of insider trading. So for example, a new airline might be about to debut a brand new jumbo jet that would make their stock prices soar. So what Le Chiffre would do is send a terrorist group to go bomb and destroy that plane. In the meantime, he would sell all of his shares of that particular airline stock. The plane explodes, the stock goes down, Le Chiffre rocks away with a fortune, etc., etc. It is a beautiful, modern villain plot, and it fits the newer, grittier tone of this Bond universe perfectly. Now, yes, even though we are at movie 21, we still have series firsts happening in Casino Royale. One of them being, yes, this is our first look at Daniel Craig as the new James Bond. Daniel Craig stirred the pot when he got cast because he is blonde. And apparently that's not what Ian Fleming was going for back in the day. And all of the blonde, James Blonde jokes around this time were getting out of hand. People will complain about every bit of casting. It's just what happens. And then, of course, just like with other pieces of casting, he came, he did the performance, everybody was wowed, and suddenly all those haters were nowhere to be heard. Because Craig gave us a Bond who was damaged, who was intimidating, who was a bruiser, who was all around a person we would not want to be in close proximity to. Unlike the other Bonds who tried to gift wrap their performances in this smarmy, likable charm, like this is a dude you could sit and have a drink with, Daniel Craig wanted his Bond to be as unapproachable and cold and ruthless as possible. Because A, that's how a real secret agent I imagine would be, and B, that's how Ian Fleming's Bond novels depicted the character. The other big first for Casino Royale is that for the first time ever, it tries to incorporate some kind of idea of a continuous timeline. I mean, yeah, we have had Teresa Bond, and ever since Teresa Bond, we have had references to Teresa Bond, but this is something different than that. This is the first Bond movie that seems to acknowledge that there is any kind of beginning, middle, or end to the James Bond story. Every other one has just existed in a vacuum. It's just been James Bond having been a secret agent already for X amount of years and going on a standard mission and ready to continue being a secret agent for X amount more of years. They really all just exist in that particular vacuum for that particular movie, but not Casino Royale. No, sir. Casino Royale is an origin story. It is the Batman Begins of James Bond. Now, from a film history standpoint, I make that comparison also because this came out a year after Batman Begins, and Batman Begins is what kickstarted the late 2000s trend of the gritty reboot. And you started seeing this a whole lot more often. Thankfully, it has started to peter out because even though it worked for Batman and it works for Bond, it doesn't work for everybody. I'm looking at you, Fantastic Four. So yeah, for the first time ever, James Bond is just starting. We are learning how he became a 00 agent. And yeah, it happens in the prologue, so it's not there for very long. He becomes 007 pretty quickly. But for that one brief couple of minutes, shot in the most gorgeous black and white I have ever seen in modern cinema, we see Bond just as a regular agent, and we learn that he only needs 2 kills to become a 00. It's not as in-depth an origin story as Batman because we don't need to see him go through basic training and all that crap. That's not relevant. What's relevant is the origin that happens to him throughout the course of this movie and the next one. That's what makes this so special. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Even though I really wish the opening title song was also called Casino Royale, because that's just a badass name for a song, it's not. It's called You Know My Name, and it's sung by Chris Cornell. I have to admit, I don't care for this song. I think it's real bland. Real bland. Of the 4 Daniel Craig movies we've gotten, this is my least favorite song. It just doesn't really hit me at all. It's better than Madonna's Die Another Day. I will listen to this over the Madonna one any day of the week. It's just not for me. However, it is worth noting that since Chris Cornell is the sole artist on this song here, he's the sole vocalist, I should say, this is the first time since all the way back in 1965 with Thunderball that we have had a James Bond song sung by a solo male performer. It was Tom Jones, a whole lot of other stuff, and now Chris Cornell. Really just makes me wish this was a better song. But I will say this opening title sequence is probably the most beautiful, colorful one the franchise has done, period. So that's a nice little trade-off. Look at all those playing cards, man. This is beautiful. They kept it simple with the gadgets because keeping it simple is kind of the trend of the Daniel Craig films, so much so that they don't even recast Q. Yes, Judi Dench is back as M, but Q is nowhere to be seen. The gadgets are just there inside Bond's car. And speaking of Bond's car, he is once again behind the wheel of a 1964 Aston Martin DB5, and this guy is happy as hell to see that car back. He also has a modern Aston Martin that comes complete with, among other things, a first aid kit. That's it. That is the extent of the Bond gadgets, and frankly, I'm cool with that. I'm also cool with our 2 Bond ladies, the first of which is Solange, played by Caterina Marino. Solange shows up at this little casino in the Bahamas wearing a hell of a nice dress, and James Bond ends up winning her husband's money and his Aston Martin, and her husband is kind of a dick, so she takes to James Bond quite well, and the 2 of them end up almost getting it on before we realize James is using her to get to her husband because her husband is involved with the bad guys. And this makes Solange very important because yes, she does fall into the pattern of secondary Bond girls, especially from the Connery era, where they would show up, they would sleep with Bond, and they would die. And that is what happens with Solange. She shows up, she almost sleeps with Bond, and then she dies. Bond seduces her to get what he wants, then he leaves her alone. The bad guys find out she talked, they murder her. And when Solange gets murdered, James is coldly detached from it all. He doesn't seem indifferent, but he just kind of stares at her body for a moment with a blank look on his face, and then turns around and continues on with his work. Because as far as he is concerned, this is a casualty of war. This is part of the process. It's part of being 007, is you have to break an egg to make this omelet that is freedom from terrorism. And it is in that cold detachment that we learn who this version of James Bond is. And we learn that among the many other reasons, this is one of the key factors that contributes to how damaged a man he is. So it makes it all the more powerful when he eventually meets the primary Bond lady of the film, Eva Green's character, Vesper Lynd. And what's great about Vesper is she comes into the fold as a Teresa Bond-esque character, but is so much stronger than that. To the point where I think, and I'm sure many people will agree with me, that even though Teresa Bond is a pretty close second, Vesper Lynd is, by and large, the absolute #1 greatest lady in the entire Bond franchise. And it's because she, not this mission, not killing 2 people to become a 00 agent, not any of the spy-related activities going on here, but she, this woman, is the origin of James Bond. At first, Bond sees Vesper as just another one of the many beautiful women he has seduced and then left over the years, but then she starts to worm her way into his heart. And I use worm, but that's kind of a mean term. I don't mean it that way. She really does end up finding the soft, mushy chocolate center of James Bond's harder shell and penetrates it. And the next thing you know, he's slowly starting to become a warmer and warmer person. And we see that happening throughout the course of the film, where he starts off as this block of ice who has no remorse whatsoever. And as time goes on, he's thawing out. And he's thawing out, and he's thawing out, and he's getting warmer and warmer until we reach a point where this man is fully thawed. And what we're looking at is no longer a sad depiction of cold stoicism, but a flesh and blood human being who, dangerous though he still may be, has found a reason to maybe smile every once in a while and have some warmth and some happiness in his life. And now the few people who do complain about Casino Royale complain that the ending drags on for too long. Well, I have to disagree, because that's not the ending. That is just part of the story. And that part of the story is once James reaches that point where he is warm, then things start taking a turn where they're not what they seem, and stuff goes wrong, and all of a sudden, James gets cold again. And when we leave the end of the movie, he is cold, but he is not the same cold man he was at the beginning. That is the power of Casino Royale, and that is the power of Vesper Lynd. I also have this theory that part of the romance between Bond and Vesper happens because of something that I like to personally call Cinderella syndrome. And here's what I mean by that. Cinderella syndrome is, as far as I know, something that I've made up. I don't think it's a real psychological condition that exists. But to me, I would define it as this. It's a point where you are in a situation with another person, and this situation is very short. It is at most 1 or 2 days long. So it's a short period of time, not long enough to really establish a meaningful romantic connection with someone. At least not in a normal circumstance. However, this 1 or 2 day period is a period where, for whatever reason, you and this person are in the same environment in a very formal setting where you are dressed to the nines and they are dressed to the nines, and there's this sort of magic in the air where it might be a party, it might be a wedding, it might be just any kind of big celebration where people are gathered and music is playing and dancing is happening. And just being in that environment of frivolity and being aware of its impermanence and being aware that there will reach a point where this party will end and all of these people will scatter and go back to their lives, and the sun will come up and you will put on your normal everyday clothes, and the magic of that prince's ball will just be nothing but a distant memory. Something about that environment encapsulating you and this other person creates sort of an opposite of the trauma effect. People bond through trauma. You get people together, you put them through severe trauma, they come out changed, and they come out with a bond that can't be broken. I feel like this is on the complete other side of the spectrum. There is no trauma whatsoever. It is a beautiful place to be. You want to be in this environment, whatever this is, a wedding, a prince's ball, what have you. But when it ends, there's a slight bit of separation anxiety because this beautiful moment came and went like a whisper in the wind, and all you have are the memories of you in that suit and her in that dress and the music that was playing. And it was there and now it's not. And now there's silence and there's light and there's no music and you're dressed normally, but that fairy tale happened. Your carriage turned back into a pumpkin, but it was a carriage last night. And you can't just let that go. And I believe that James Bond's time spent in the Casino Royale with Vesper during this mission was an example of Cinderella syndrome, because he had a very successful mission. He did go through a lot of trauma, but at the end of the day, it turned into something beautiful, and he couldn't let go of that. So even though this is a movie where a plane almost gets blown up and there's a poker game with a $10 million buy-in, somehow they made the romance believable enough that I actually felt it resonate with me. Either that or maybe I'm just a sick weirdo who likes terrorism and card games. I don't know. Speaking of terrorism, let's meet the terrorists who are making Bond's life so unpleasant. We have 2 villains in this film, and things are played a little differently with them. First, we have Mr. White, played by Jesper Christensen. Mr. White is very enigmatic. He just kind of hovers around. He doesn't really do much, but we know he's controlling the pieces on the chessboard, and he comes into play at the very end of the movie. But mostly, we spend our time with Mads Mikkelsen's character, the great Bond villain, Le Chiffre. And Le Chiffre is taking part in this $10 million buy-in poker game at the Casino Royale in Montenegro because he is planning to take his winnings and use them to fund terrorism, and he is fairly certain he will win because he's just one of those guys who always wins. He's a mathematician, he's a numbers guy, so he's great at counting cards. He has an excellent poker face. He's great at bluffing, he's great at hiding his tell and faking his tell. But what makes Le Chiffre so interesting as a Bond villain is how he's dispatched, and it's not by Bond. In fact, he has Bond at his mercy. He is winning when suddenly Mr. White shows up and decides to kill Le Chiffre himself because Le Chiffre owed Mr. White money and Le Chiffre lost the poker game, so Mr. White ain't having that. It's a magnificent turnaround of the whole cliche setup where Bond confronts the villain at the very end and they have a final boss fight and then Bond wins. This goes down a completely different road, and I remember it shocking the audience in the movie theater when Le Chiffre got killed and there was still a whole third of this movie left to go. And when Le Chiffre has Bond at his mercy, we get the death trap scene that I think made every man who watched this movie clench just a little bit more than normal. Yes, I'm talking about the rope nut torture. Ladies, I'm sure you know this, but just in case you haven't discovered yet, when a man gets injured down there, not fun. So in order to ensure maximum not funnage, Le Chiffre and his goons take off all of Bond's clothes, tie him naked to a chair that has no bottom. Basically, he's sitting on a toilet seat with legs. Then Le Chiffre grabs a piece of rope with a huge weighted chunk of rope at the bottom, swings it like he's spreading incense at a church, and then bam, that chunk of rope hits James right in his little 00 agents. Even the death traps are gritty in this new Bond era. The best quote definitely comes from what I believe to be the scene with the best dialogue of any James Bond movie ever, and that is the scene on the train where James Bond meets Vesper Lynd for the first time. And they start to size one another up, and there's witty repartee galore, and it's very British. Vesper ends up getting the upper hand, closing out the conversation with this. You think of women as disposable pleasures rather than meaningful pursuits. So as charming as you are, Mr. Bond, I will be keeping my eye on our government's money and off your perfectly formed arse. Bond, snarky as ever, says, "You've noticed." And Vesper concludes, "Even accountants have imagination." I could listen to those two banter with each other all the livelong day. One of my favorite things about Casino Royale is that Felix Leiter has finally come back since 1989. That was the last time we saw him in License to Kill when he was disagreeing with something that ate him. Well, he's back, and this time he's played by Jeffrey Wright. And I think this may have been the first thing I ever saw Jeffrey Wright in. But he plays a great Felix Leiter. He's so intense. Like a true CIA agent, he's under the radar. We keep seeing him. We're like, who's this guy? They keep showing this man, and he's just around, and he looks kind of shifty, and he's playing cards, but he just always seems to be right there. And then finally, he reveals himself to be Felix Leiter. And when that happened, I remember sitting in the movie theater and going, ah! Felix, my friend, it is good to have you back. And Jeffrey, my friend, it is good to have you here. James and Vesper also have another ally, Rene Mathis. He's a wonderful Italian gentleman who helps them out on their quest. He does get a little bit annoying because they choose to have Mathis do really unnecessary commentary for the poker game. From Madagascar to Nassau, Bahamas, to Casino Royale in Montenegro, to Venice, Italy. We hop around the globe and we get some gorgeous James Bond adventure action. Every single moment of this 2-hour and 24-minute film is radiant. And I think it's so interesting that they took one of the small things that Bond likes to do in his spare time, playing cards at a casino, and they made it an integral part of the plot. That is James's mission. He has to win a game of poker, very high stakes poker, in order to keep this man, Le Chiffre, from funding terrorism for another 20 or 30 years. And yeah, I know it's not an original idea. They're taking the concept from the very first Ian Fleming novel and adapting that. But because this movie came so late in the game, as opposed to the novel which came first, it feels like it's reverse engineered, but in the most wonderful positive way. This is a reboot after all. And there's really nothing else like that out there that you can compare it to. And it made me realize we know so much about what James Bond likes to do in his spare time and who he likes to do in his spare time. And we know very little about our other heroes, don't we? What does Bruce Wayne like to do in his spare time? Does he like to play cards? Is he a fan of pizza? And if so, what does he put on it? What does Captain America like to drink when he's sitting at home and unwinding? We don't know any of these things, but with Bond, we know all of his little vices. So much so that they took one of those vices and made it the plot of a movie. I don't think that has been appreciated enough. I don't think we as a society have appreciated enough the fact that we know this protagonist's likes and dislikes to the point where one of them can hold up an entire plot of a 2.5-hour movie on its own. That's unheard of. But that has been Casino Royale, a royal flush of a film as far as this guy is concerned. But the story's not over yet because the movie ends with Bond heartbroken and Bond wondering who this man was that Vesper was trying to save so desperately that she teamed up with this shadowy organization, and he kidnaps Mr. White to find out exactly who it is. And we don't see the culmination of that until the next movie. Stay tuned tomorrow when the countdown to Bond 25 delves into the darkest pockets of James Bond we've ever seen.